I'm sure you've heard about this recent case where a woman escaped from a Cinderblock cell after some dude kidnapped her. If you're like me, there was major serial killer vibes. And the more I learned about this guy, the stronger those vibes got. So, let's get into it. Hi folks, and welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Delaney. I'm a true crime writer and big-time murder nerd. On this channel, I like to take deep dives into terrible cases, and I tend to cuss a lot. So if that sounds like your idea of a good time, go ahead and subscribe. If not, that's cool. You do you. Today, I want to take a dive into a really recent case, that of Negasi Zuberi. The whole thing started, or at least we first learned about it, on July 15th. That's when a panicked woman flagged down a driver in Klamath Falls, Oregon, saying she'd just escaped from being locked up in a cell. So the driver called 911. Now, police haven't released the woman's name yet, but she'll probably be identified when the case goes to court. Anyway, this woman told police a story that is absolutely chilling. Earlier that day, technically just after midnight, she was working on Aurora Avenue in Seattle, which is an area kind of infamous for being sort of a drug and sex work market street. And yes, that's the kind of work she was doing. So then a man came up to her to engage her services. Then, apparently after he got those services, he claimed he was an undercover cop. She said he flashed a badge and pointed a stun gun at her. He then, quote, arrested her by putting her in handcuffs and leg irons. He then put her in the back of his car, and after driving with her back there for some period of time, he pulled over and sexually assaulted her, then put her back in the car. She said it was only when she saw the man's GPS showing that their destination was 4 hours away that she knew the guy wasn't actually a cop. Notice, it wasn't when he raped her. Anyway, he drove her back to his home in Klamath Falls, a 7.5-hour trip total. Once they got there, she said he shoved her inside a Cinderblock cell and told her he was leaving to, quote, do some paperwork. The woman said she fell asleep for a while, she's not sure how long, but when she woke up and saw where she was, she knew if she didn't get out, she would never get out alive. So the cell had a metal door, and I guess she could tell there was a weakness there, because she started just punching the shit out of it until she managed to break one of the door's welded joints, which created an opening that she could climb through. Which she did. She saw his car parked in the garage with a gun apparently just sitting in the front seat. So, fearing for her life, she grabbed the gun and ran outside, climbed over a 6-foot fence, and flagged down that driver. She was able to tell police exactly where she'd been, and it didn't take long to show the house was rented to a man named Negasi Zuberi and his wife. When police went to Zuberi's house to question him about it, they saw the Cinderblock cell he'd built in the garage. The door was broken just the way the woman described it. There was also blood on the inside of the cell, as well as on the fence she'd had to climb over, further corroborating her story. But they also found something else. A notebook with handwritten pages labeled Operation Take Over. In it were sketches and plans to build an underground version of the same thing, along with tips on how not to get caught. Like, make sure they don't have a bunch of people in their life. You don't want any type of investigation. But luckily for us, he didn't follow his own plan. His number one tip was leave cell phone at home, which, duh. Cell phone records show his phone traveling to Seattle on July 15th, then traveling back home soon afterwards. So pretty much as soon as they laid eyes on that, let's call it what it is, murder cell, they were able to get a warrant for his arrest. But he'd fled the state. The next day, he was tracked down to a Walmart parking lot in Reno. When the Nevada State Patrol officers approached him, he was in the front seat of his car holding one of his children and talking to his wife, who was standing outside the vehicle. He initially refused to get out of the car, which led to a standoff with police. For 45 minutes, he refused to get out of the car, using his child as a hostage. During that time, he cut himself with a sharp object and tried to destroy his phone. which tells me there's probably some evidence on that phone. Thankfully, he eventually surrendered and the child was unharmed, at least physically. He was charged with interstate kidnapping and transporting an individual across state lines with intent to engage in criminal sexual activity. He could face up to life in prison if convicted. So, first off, I want to give so much respect to that woman who escaped. That took so much courage, and I really, really hope she's getting whatever support she needs. I think it's also a safe bet to say she was not his first victim. The fact that he tried to off himself and destroy his phone makes me really think he's done something a lot more serious than just kidnapping and sexual assault. Sure enough, soon after his arrest, the FBI put out more information about this guy, and it's making my serial killer detector go off big time. For one, he has several aliases, including Justin Kawase, Negasi Zuberi, and Justin Heish. And he has a long list of violent offenses against women. The FBI says that he's been linked to violent sexual assaults in 4 states. They haven't said which states, but I was able to find about 2 in California, along with some more indicators about just how dangerous this guy is. In 2016, he was living in Oakland when he victimized a 16-year-old high school student. The girl told police that she had just met, quote, Justin at a McDonald's there, and they had sexual relations. As soon as her mom found out about it, she called the cops. He was arrested for felony unlawful sex with a minor. He pled no contest in 2017 and was sentenced to 60 days in jail. And then we're going to take a little detour here because this is just way too weird not to mention. In 2019, he appeared on the Judge Judy show under the name Justin Heish. He was suing his ex-fiancée and mother of his 2 children, Alicia Westfall, claiming she had attacked him during a custody dispute. Judge Judy found in his favor and ordered Westfall to pay him $2,500 in damages. But just months later, in 2020, Westfall filed a petition seeking a restraining order against him. In that petition, she said he would physically attack her, hit her, break her windows, and scream at her and the kids. She said, quote, "He scares me." I haven't been able to find out if that protective order was ever actually granted. It was in May of that same year, again under the alias Justin Heish, when he viciously beat, strangled, and essayed another 16-year-old girl in San Francisco. He pled no contest in December of 2020 and was granted probation, which makes me think either that protective order was never granted or else the judge just didn't give a shit that this guy was clearly a dangerous, violent offender. But the next year, his probation was revoked and a warrant was issued for his arrest after he failed to report multiple times to his probation officer. I don't think he was ever actually arrested because that year, that would be 2022, in Denver, Colorado, a man named Justin Kawase, which is one of his known aliases, was accused of punching someone in the face. An arrest warrant was issued for Justin Kawase, but they were never able to bring him in. There's still an active warrant out for him in Colorado. It looks like he fled to Vancouver, Washington, where he rented a 2-story townhouse with his new wife and their 2 sons. And here is where we start to get a look into just how unstable this guy is. His former neighbors called him a, quote, neighborhood menace, who would threaten them and lured young girls to come and live with him. Neighbors also said he would bring, quote, prostitutes and weirdos there at all hours of the night. He was apparently making his money by breeding pit bulls and illegally renting out rooms and beds inside the house, where he was acting like he owned it. One neighbor recalled an exchange that, in hindsight, made him really uneasy. He said that sometime in December of 2022, he saw a young woman standing outside in the freezing cold wearing shorts and crying outside Zuberi's house. He said the woman told him that she and Zuberi had had a really big fight and he'd taken her keys and cell phone.
I'm like, I can take you to a shelter. I'm like, do you want me to call the cops? She's, no, don't call the cops, like freaked out. And I'm like, okay, like, I'm like, is there something going on inside the house that we need to know about? She's like, I can't tell you guys anything, what's happening. Almost like her life wasn't threatened if she did speak.
Interestingly, one of the many people who rented a room from him said he seemed nervous and paranoid when police were around, or even if they were just mentioned. I mean, he did have at least 2 active warrants out for his arrest. But he sure as hell wasn't laying low about it. That same neighbor also said Zuberi had threatened him after they had a confrontation over the fact that he was driving drunk and had backed into the neighbor's trash cans. The neighbor, understandably, told him to get off his property. But the neighbor says, quote, he started threatening me and took off his shirt.
Zuberi's former neighbor, Danny Bratkov, says he had a bad feeling about the 29-year-old.
He did make some threats towards me that he was going to stab me or kill me if he catches me outside somewhere. That night that he was yelling at me, he literally looked like a killer. Literally, his eyes were just, it was actually scary.
Another neighbor who did not want to be named filed a restraining order against him in March after he allegedly sent a threatening text message saying, I'm gonna fuck you up. She said Zuberi started getting belligerent with her after she'd approached him about the large RV parked in front of the house, which is a violation of the neighborhood's HOA rules. She said he got even more agitated when he was confronted about the trash piling up on his property. The neighbor said he was a, quote, nightmare. Quote, he had pit bulls running around and random people coming in and out of the house. The cops showed up a bunch of times and I never knew what he was going to be up to. Eventually, the landlord had to evict him. He said that besides illegally subletting the home, breeding dogs, damaging the property, and threatening neighbors, he also hadn't paid the rent in 6 months. So he and his now wife and kids moved to Oregon, to the house where he built that murder cell. Weirdly, the house is actually owned by Klamath Falls Mayor Carol Westfall and her husband. I don't think they're any relation to that first girlfriend. Even though he'd only lived there a few months, there had already been a call to animal control over his pit bulls escaping and running wild on the street. During that call, he gave the police yet another name, Sakima Stringer. Anyway, as soon as Zuberi was arrested, the mayor evicted him. As of the time I'm filming this, he's still in custody in Nevada, waiting to be extradited back to Oregon. So, right off the bat, this case is already raising a metric shit ton of red flags. Like, what the fuck is with that homemade Cinderblock cell? Has it been processed to see if there's DNA from any other women in there? Then, look at his MO. Classic serial killer shit. He drove to another state, picked up a sex worker specifically, just like he had planned out in that notebook, and apparently was going to keep her locked up in that cell until, well, note that he never even tried to hide his face. You can't tell me he was going to just let her go after that. And I am certain that this was not the first time he's done something like this. And by like this, I mean finished doing what he was probably planning on doing to that woman who escaped. So, since he transported her across state lines, it's the FBI's jurisdiction. They've rightfully extended their investigation into the many states where he's lived since August 2016, including California, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Illinois, Utah, Florida, New York, New Jersey, Alabama, and Nevada. Looking over his past record of sexual assaults, the FBI said he appeared to target sex workers and roommates, or maybe tenants, and would use different methods to gain control of his victims, including drugging their drinks, pretending to be a police officer, and soliciting the services of sex workers before violently sexually assaulting them, and in some cases, filming the assaults. The FBI says some of the assaults might have been filmed in such a way so it would look like everything was consensual. The victims were threatened with retaliation if they called the police. Stephanie Shark, the FBI agent in charge of the case, said it best.
The disturbing evidence uncovered to date points to an individual's ongoing and escalating pattern of violence targeting women in multiple states throughout the country.
The FBI is asking anyone who is victimized by him to come forward. You can call the tip line at 1-800-CALL-FBI or go to their site at fbi.gov/Zuberi victims. They've stated that they are committed to protecting victims' rights to privacy, and they said they'll honor anyone's wish not to become involved in the legal system. I think we need to keep an eye on this case. I have a strong feeling we're going to find out about a lot more victims before it's all over. So, what are your thoughts about this case? Had you heard of it? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure and give it a like and subscribe. You can also click the membership button to help me keep telling more terrible stories like this. Till next time.